Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at this APM webinar. I'm Robert Allen, APM Branches Manager, and I'll be your host today. I would like to extend my thanks to the APM East of England branch and Peter for all their efforts and achievements with today's webinar. You will find yourselves in mute-only mode, but we're keen to get you involved today. There'll be some interaction elements along the way, so please have your phone ready or another web browser open and go to slido.com, and we're using the code APM RISK. We will show that on screen later. If you've got any questions for Peter, you can also submit that via your control panel, and time dependent at the end, I'll put those to Peter to get you the response. Today will count towards your CPD. There's some information in the handouts for you to take away, so you can do that review element, so you can see what information you've learned and taken forward in your project management role. So enough about me. I'm going to introduce our speaker, Peter. So Peter Simon. Peter has been a member of the APM for a very, very long time. He's shared with me. Peter is one of few to be both a fellow and an honorary fellow of the APM. Peter is currently the chair of the APM HeuristicS, so that's the specific interest group. They've got a community page on the APM website. Please go along and follow them so you can keep a track on their future activities, and was previous chair in the 1990s. Peter has worked for APM, including being project manager for BOK 5, co-creator for the introductory certificate, now PFQ, and the practitioner qualification, now PPQ. Peter has also helped create the single subject certificates in risk management. Peter is currently leading the revision of the PRAM guide. Outside of the APM, Peter is a visiting fellow of Cranfield School for Management and director of Lucidus Consulting. So on that note, Peter, I'll pass over to you. Enjoy today's session, everyone.
Hi there, everybody, wherever you might be. I'm going to introduce some topics that may be very new to some of you, but they form an integral part of project risk management, which is why we're talking about them today, and also why they form quite a large element of those single subject certificates that Robert told you about. So if you ever get to take the APM's qualifications in risk management, most of the syllabus actually will be covering today, or the relevant parts of the syllabus. So the title today is the impact of heuristics and biases on project risk management. And I suppose the message I'm going to tell you today is that these areas, heuristics and biases, affect the whole of the risk management process. In fact, they do impact the whole of management and decision making. And I'll talk to you more about that later on and give you some papers that you might want to download and read, because they will actually help you understand these topics more. So, a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about has been drawn from a couple of books written by friends of mine for a very long time, David Hillson and Ruth Murray-Webster. You might have come across them before. Ruth and I used to work for the same company. She used to be a director of Lucidus Consulting, and David Hillson and I have known each other for a very long time. We were both members of the HeuristicS back in the 1990s. And David, you might know by his informal title as the risk doctor. So I'm just putting these up on here because if you really do want to get into some of these things we're going to talk about in a lot more detail, then I would recommend that you read these books. The one on the left is about your personal risk attitude, and the one on the right is about how groups react. And a lot of what we'll talk about today will be drawn from that research in those books that David wrote. And so before we start, here's a picture. Some of you may have seen this picture before. Have a look at it, and then I'm going to ask Robert to ask you a question about what you see. And actually, there's only two things I want you to look at here. So what do you see there? So Robert, when you're ready, if you'd like to, we'll give you a few more seconds, but what do you see there?
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. So as mentioned at the start, please get involved. Slido, get out your phone and zap that QR code and join us. As we showed, Peter had an image up. Do you see a young woman or an older woman? Let us know. So Peter, we've got over 100 people with us today, so we'll give this a little longer to go through and voting, but at the minute it looks like a young woman is leading the way on around 70%, and I can see about 40 odd people have got involved, so thank you. I'll keep this running for a couple more seconds, but it looks like young woman's leading the way. Peter, I'll pass back to you.
Thank you. Well, thankfully, on that little bit there, that some people saw the old woman as well. And so actually, when I look at this, I find it difficult to see the young woman, because in my head, I always see the old woman. If I step back and recalibrate myself, look around for the screen, I can see the young woman. Now, the only reason I've showed you today is just to give you and remind you that we all see things in different ways. And even though this is not really associated with risk management, I put it here to just make you realize that some people see the world through, you might say, rose-tinted glasses, and to a younger woman, others are more perhaps inclined to see things in a more older way, pessimistic way, and see the old woman. There has actually been a lot of research done based on this one picture, and you can find lots on the internet. And one of the things I read about this recently, and again, we can't test this in this environment, but generally, younger people see the younger woman and older people see the older woman. Now, why that is, I don't know, but maybe it's just the way you're looking at life. So thank you for participating in that. Take a step back, see if you can see both perspectives of this. And actually, that's one of the things you've got to realize when it comes to heuristics and biases and then risk attitude and so on, is sometimes you can, if you think about it, see the other perspective. Sometimes you have to see the other perspective, because if you get stuck in your way of thinking, then perhaps it won't be good for you personally, but maybe not good for the projects that you're working on. So let's move on. Some of you will be familiar with this. This is the process that comes out of the current PRAM guide. It's a pretty standard risk management process. Forget all the feedback loops that you see in here. They are rather a bit of noise, but 5-stage risk management process, similar to what's in the PMI PMBOK. Initiate, identify, assess, plan your responses, and implement the responses. And then the sidebar is about just keeping it alive, managing the process. Now, when you understand some of the topics that we're going to talk about more here, you'll realize that every aspect of the risk management process is affected by these heuristics and biases. And as we go through this presentation today, I'll do my best to show how some of those may manifest themselves. Now, this slide here, I've taken it from one of the books I mentioned earlier. I put this in because if you actually do a search on heuristics and biases on the internet, you'll actually find loads and loads of information. In fact, there are many, many more heuristics and biases than you see on this screen here. However, these are some of what you might call the popular ones you'll find lots written on. And again, if you want to find out more, read those books. But as we go through, I'm going to pick a few of these out to give you some more information on. And we will revisit those three main headings: conscious factors, subconscious factors, and affective factors, when we look at another concept later on, which is called the triple strand. These biases and factors and heuristics, whatever we want to call them, are there all the time. We're living them all the time. Some people call these rules of thumb. We need them to make decisions. Sometimes we don't have time to think. Sometimes we have to react. And it's actually a fascinating subject. And the more I look into this, I'm absolutely amazed by how this affects our life. But also, I'm amazed by how some people use this. So some of the illusionists that you might know of, Darren Brown or Dynamo, what they're often playing with are these factors here, the way we see the world. And you can use this for good, and you can use this for bad. So I won't say anything about NLP practitioners, but certainly NLP practitioners know a lot about this, and they can use this perhaps in a in a way that some people might not totally agree with. So we might come back to some of this slide, but we'll certainly come back to some of these individual things that are listed here individually as we go through. So just think about us as individuals, that little box in the bottom there. What affects us? What makes us what we are? And in many ways, how does that affect our perception of the world? What you see there is that little bit in the bottom, individual, and we are part of work, family, community, organization, nations, and the world. Sorry about that. I haven't coughed all day, so I start speaking now. And all those have influences on us. And as we see later on, we understanding how those two things influence us can help us understand not only how general decisions are made, but how the risk management process works. And it's just not one thing. We are what we are, but we're not totally independent. Everything here is influencing us and our perception of risk and those heuristics and biases and how they come to play. So this is going to give me a little bit of a time to take a breath. I'm going to ask you some questions now, and when I've asked you the questions, Robert's going to put up another Slido for you to answer, and I would like you to answer in, of course, be honest, but the first thing that comes to your mind comes to mind. So don't ponder on it, just say, and you'll see the questions in a minute. So what's the first thing that comes to mind? So, and the things you're going to have to answer are never, don't think I will, not sure, I'll give it a go, or definitely. So just, not never, I'd never do that. On the other extreme, absolutely, I'm really up for that too. Well, from never, don't think I will, no, don't think that's a good idea. You're ambivalent, not sure, yeah, I think I will, or absolutely on the right-hand side. So it's not a precise scale. So the first thing is, I don't know if any of you have done this, abseiling, or I think in some languages it's called rappelling. So just imagine I said to you, and if we were in a room together, which we're not, I could say, we're going to go outside now. If we were in East Anglia, it might be difficult, but if we're more in the Midlands, I say we're going to go out into the Peak District, or into where there's some large hills. I've got some ropes in the back of my car. We're going to climb a hill and find a steep ledge, and I'm going to tie the ropes to a tree, and then we're all going to abseil off it. We're all going to go down. You know what to do. I've got one of those belts that you put around yourself so it all works out, so you're not going to free fall. I've got all the right gear, and I've done it before. How many of you would want to do that? Who's up for that? Who's up for abseiling tomorrow? Come on, let's go and do it. Who would do it?
Excellent, thank you, Peter. So we've had the scenario outlined. Who's going to be brave and come along with Peter, tie a rope round a tree? I don't know how strong the tree is, and abseil down a rock face. So Peter, hopefully you can see the results coming in at the same time.
No definitely's though. Is that I don't know, hopefully that's not on there, but no really definitely.
It looks like you've got a core people of jumping in your car this weekend and going to the top of a mountain,
so that's good. So, but we have got a spectrum of people. So if Robert could reset that, we don't need to see the picture again, Robert. If you could reset that and just say, so actually, let me add a little bit more information here. Let's just say, rather than me doing it, I think maybe we should get someone from an outward bound organization, someone who's ex-military, who actually does this for a living, and get them to come along with us. And I won't be tying it to a tree. They will do it. They'll set it up and they'll be there. And one of their pals would be at the bottom waiting for you to come down. Would any of you, how would that work now? Would anybody be more up for that?
So I think the early signs show, Peter, that although people would like to spend a day with you going down a rock face, they feel a lot more comfortable giving it a go with maybe some professionals.
we lost
Yeah.
definitely on here, Robert, in some way? I see definitely is not there, and is the definitely option gone?
Oh, it doesn't look like anyone's.
Either or no one's clicking on it. I don't know. It seems that we've maybe definitely has been missed off. Anyway, okay, but obviously, and from what I remember, the number's gone up. Now let me just ask you one more question. If you do it, you can give it's going to be sponsored by an international company. Says anybody who can complete that, they will give on your behalf £500 to a charity of your choice. Could do it now. There's a £500 charity of your choice.
So again, numbers are rocketing.
So what you have to ask yourself now is, what's changed? What's happened here? Obviously, there's some who are never going to do it, some who are not sure, and maybe nothing would change their mind. But what happens is the situation changes from me with ropes in the back of my car to using professionals to giving you an incentive. An incentive, and bear in mind what that means, is the risks are still the same, but the reward is different. And therefore, does that mean that under certain situations, you either see the risk differently, or your perception of the risk changes, or you are just willing to take more chances if someone else is going to get a gain from it. Okay, so let's reset all that. And if you could, you don't have to look at the screen, but just to say, let me ask you a different question, completely different. And the same idea, would you never? I don't think you will, not sure, I'll give it a go, definitely. Now, I don't know what your working status is, but some of you might know that there are opportunities for people to get alternative work. And sometimes you could theoretically earn X times the amount of money you're earning by taking a freelance or a consultancy role elsewhere. So if I said to you now, whatever, it doesn't matter what you're doing, if I could say to you, I've got a job that will pay you 4 times what you're earning now. However, it's only 3 months guaranteed, but you do have a month's notice. How many would do that? 3 months work being paid 4 times what you're getting at the moment. Would anybody do that? Leave their job to do that?
So you're definitely getting some responses through, Peter. I noticed one person said they'll give it a go even before you outlined the proposal.
Yeah, they saw what it was. Maybe they preempted it. Okay, what about if I said the contract was, or the job was for a year, and if you were severed within that year, you still get your full year's payment, and there was 3 months notice? Would anybody do anything different there? So it's gone from 3 months to a year's guaranteed work with 3 months notice. Would anybody do it then? Okay. Again, people's views change, depend on the situation. And even though I can't see actual numbers, sometimes it's actually better if we don't use percentages because it's relevant to the number of people. But again, people's views change on here. Let me tell you a little. This is a story, but it's also true. I was working not so long ago. It wasn't. It was a long time ago, but in my lifetime, it wasn't that long ago. With a company in the UK who used to run the telephone system. So some of you might know who I'm talking about. Those of you who work up in the east of England might have driven past their huge research and development centre at Martlesham Heath. Anyway, I was working with this company and I met a guy who was top of his field in a certain area of networking, let's just say. And he'd worked for this company all of his working life, and he started off as a 16-year-old, and they'd sponsored him through various qualifications, including a master's, an MBA. But anyway, he was in his 40s, and literally he was being headhunted by the top consultants and offering him multipliers of the salary that he was earning at that point in time, and with far less risk than potentially here. It was a staff job, no need to work, but Anyway, he spoke to me and said, what would I do? And I said, well, why wouldn't you? And he said, well, actually, I don't think I'm going to take that job. And I said, why? He said, well, I've got my pension. And he went on, and I said, but you're going to earn 3 times as much money. You can retire earlier and you can port your pension. Anyway, he said, no, I'm not going to do it. At the end of that conversation, there was another person listening in, and he said, ask him what he does at the weekend. Well, in fact, I should say at that point in time, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. It's too risky. No, it's too risky. Then someone said, ask him what he does at the weekend. And I said, well, I was a bit worried about asking that question, but I said, so what do you do at the weekend? And he said, oh, I do free climbing. I said, what do you mean? He said, I climb mountains without ropes. He said, I absolutely love it. I said, and you just said that's too risky. He said, well, there's no risk involved in what I'm doing. I'm totally in control. I'm my own boss. And his whole, he was one of these people whose absolute life, the wonderful thing he'd like to do would to do that El Capitan thing. I don't know if you've ever seen the film, but climb that. He said, if I could get the opportunity to do that, I'd jump at it. And I said, you must be mad. But the whole message behind that is people perceive things in different ways. And why that is sometimes difficult to understand, but we're going to get there now. So thank you for participating in those questions. Now, a lot of what we're talking about here, David and Ruth in their book came up with this model, and it's called the Triple Strand. So let me just show my screen again. Thank you, Robert. I'd forgotten about that. So here you can see the triple strand of influences. Now, if you remember that table I showed you earlier, that was split up into conscious factors, things like proximity, how close it is to you in time, how manageable you think things are. So that conscious factors, things you can see, feel, or touch, if you like. Subconscious factors, which are the things going on inside your head. That's where heuristics and biases come in. And then there's the more emotional, affective factors. You can talk about those. We can see those. You can observe those. You can understand those yourselves. But when David and Ruth did their research on this, they realized it's an absolute mess, because all these things come together, and it's those 3 elements that influence our perception of risk and our risk attitude. And even though this is quite a messy diagram, if you like, if you want to get to any way of understanding how these influences influence you and the risk management process, you need to unpick some of this. So again, pulling out of David and Ruth's book, risk attitude is personal. Not everyone thinks the same, and not everyone thinks the same on the same day. The expression or proverb, you must put out the wrong side of the bed today, is real. It's real. You can think differently on different days. It's situational. You don't think the same in every situation. So the guy I was telling you about, too risky to leave his job, earn 4 times as much money or whatever, but climbing a mountain without ropes, no problem at all. And it's perception based. It's all about how you perceive the situation, and we see things through different eyes. You saw that with the picture, and you saw that potentially with those questions that I did ask you. So using some of the definitions that you may have come across before, risk is the combination of probability of an event and its consequences, can be good or bad. And attitude, this is from the dictionary, a complex mental view or disposition to a situation, and so on. And if we look at this, then we can say that risk attitude is a chosen response to uncertainty that matters, driven by perception. So when people actually say something, if you ever hear people say, I'm risk averse, that's a choice. I'm risk seeking, that's a choice. The guy who didn't want to leave his job, that was a choice. Climbing a mountain without a rope is a choice. Now, we may have inclinations to this, but we can choose to be what we want to be. It's not hardwired. That's what this would tell us. Now, as part of the work that I keep saying Ruth and David, and the reason why I keep referring to them, I shouldn't keep saying excuse here. I worked with them all the time, all the way to when they put these books together. I'll tell you more about that later on, and I was helped them with formulate some of their ideas. And one of the things that they also came up with was this risk attitude spectrum. Now, there is a questionnaire associated with this. I couldn't think of a way of getting you to do it online, but if anybody wants the questionnaire associated with this, drop me an email at the end. My email address is going to be in the final slide, and I'll send you the questionnaire for you to fill in, maybe with a couple of instructions, and then it'll tell you whether or not your preference is, or your current preference is, to be risk-seeking, risk-averse, risk-neutral, or risk-tolerant. I'm not going to go into any great detail here, but what this shows is there is a spectrum. Some people are naturally risk-seeking. Some people are naturally risk-averse. Risk-averse people tend to be people who do identify risks. They have risk registers and things like that. They understand the risks. Someone who's risk-seeking is the sort of person who says, I'm going to go for a walk today. I look outside where I am today, it's pouring with rain. They just go out, whatever. They don't take an umbrella, they don't care, they just say, bring it on. So there's no risk analysis done there, it's just bring it on. Now, sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. If you don't want to catch pneumonia, maybe you shouldn't be risk-seeking in that way. But also, if you want to get on with and take some chances, then being wholly risk-averse is not necessarily a good place to be. Now, we fit into this spectrum. You can modify that, but sometimes our if you like, our want is to be in one side of this or not. If I was actually running, this is never going to happen nowadays, a risk workshop for you, I would actually get everybody to fill in this questionnaire to begin with, because it might affect the way I conduct the risk workshop and get you to identify risks. And in particular, if I wanted you to start to identify upside risks or opportunities. So again, if you want to find out some more about this, drop me an email and I'll send you the questionnaire. It is referred to in those books I've told you about already, and there's articles you can find on the internet that have been written about this. So just looking at some of those heuristics and biases, some of the ones that come across and seem to have the biggest impact on the work that I do, and maybe some of the work that you do, which is working with organizations to try and identify and manage risks in a way such they can have a better chance of meeting the objectives that they're setting out for. So risk is an uncertainty that, if it happens, will impact one or more of your objectives. And in the world of project management, that tends to be delivering your project on time, within budget, to the agreed performance, quality objectives, and of course, ultimately delivering the benefits that you set out to do. And one of the things that we have to do is identify risks. I do a lot of quantitative risk analysis. I do a lot of formulating risk response plans. Now, it may not be obvious from this picture here, but one of the heuristics that affects risk identification is that we tend to give more emphasis to something that is has happened recently, or something significant that has happened in the past. Maybe something significant to us that's happened in the past. So what that actually does is it means we identify those things, but also when it comes to assessing probability, we can overemphasize the likelihood of that happening. I remember a situation, it's many years ago now, where some of you might know what I'm talking about. On the railway line that goes from King's Cross north, there was a couple of accidents, train accidents on that line. I think one was at a place called Potter's Bar, one was at a place called Hatfield. They happened within quite a short period of time. And after those accidents occurred, one of the people I was working with did some quite crude research, but some research around asking people, how often do you think rail accidents occur? Now, these had happened within short proximity, close to one another, fairly recently. And the answers he was getting back was, oh, at least once or twice a year, or oh, at least every 6 months, or whatever you want to say. But if you took the 10 years prior to that, there hadn't been any rail accidents of any significance. And so what was happening there was the availability, the newness of that information was biasing that assessment of probability. And it can also assess, it can affect the impact, and of course, going back to where I started, it can affect the identification. So this availability heuristic is something you need to be aware of. And if I was talking to you and you'd identified something or said something immediately, how likely is this to occur? You say it's almost certain. I'd ask the question, why? And you might say, well, on my last 3 projects, this has happened. Then I might say to other people, has it ever happened on your projects? And they might say never. So sometimes you have to try and get beyond initial perceptions. Another of the popular heuristics and biases, which again you'll see in that table I mentioned earlier, is something called the representativeness heuristic. Some people call this stereotyping. Human beings like to do this. It's actually a mental shortcut in that we don't have to process as much information by actually saying this is just like something else I know. And what you see on this picture, if we have that octagon there, and there isn't a shape underneath that matches that octagon. But what we try and do is find something that looks like it, something we've done before, or something that resembles it. It's certainly not like that one. It may be like the square. It's not like this one. No, it's not like that one. No, no. Well, circle. There you go. That might be. Yeah, it's near enough. And this may be something that you may never have even thought of, but we do it all the time. And I'd be careful here that I don't malign certain people or certain trade, but you know, all builders are cowboys. What we mean by that is that those of you who are not in the UK, that if you hire a builder to come do work for you, they're going to always try to rip you off. All contractors want to make claims because that's the way they make their money. Is that true? Are certain companies worse than other companies to work for? Are certain cultures always the same? In England, we have various stereotypes about, if I'm English, about Welsh people, about Scots people, about Irish people, about French people. And that may bias our judgments, bias our way we react to certain things. But we do it for good reason. We do it for simplicity. And one of the things I find is that we need, when I help people look at probabilities and impacts and identifying risks, you know, is what you're saying true? It may have been true then. Is it true now? So be careful about stereotyping things because we are prone to do it. It makes life easier for us if we don't have to think and explain situations. Now, this next one is, again, very interesting. And I don't know whether I can do this. I had something in my mind. It doesn't require Robert to do anything on the poll. What I'm going to do is, if you've got we can do this very quickly, and I'm going to ask anybody who's got a first name that is A through to, let's say, what's A, B, C, D, E, A to L, turn your microphone off now for 30 seconds. A to L, turn your microphone off. 30 seconds, turn it off. Right, those of you still listening, I'm going to ask you a question. Is the population of Liechtenstein greater than 20,000? Yes or no? And what do you think it is? Is the population of Liechtenstein greater than 20,000? And what do you think it is? Now, write that down or think of it. Yes or no, 20,000. So I'm going to wait a few minutes, and those of you who answered that question. Now, others, if you're coming back in, and I have no idea if this has worked, I want to ask you the new people coming back into the question now. So those of you who've answered, forget what you've written. This is for the new people who've just switched back on. It's hopefully, is the population of Liechtenstein greater than 2 million? Yes or no? What do you think it is? Okay. Now, you may think, what the is Peter going on about there? Now, some of you may know what the population of Liechtenstein is. It's a small country in the middle of Europe. It's about, population is about 32,000. You might have known that. But if you were unaware of the situation, what this anchoring and adjustment heuristic says or leads you to do is that if you don't know, you tend to anchor to the number that you first thought of or you were provoked to think of. So I can't go around and ask you what you wrote down, but if we were doing this in a class and I was using a flip chart and you all had pieces of paper, I would guarantee that unless something had gone wrong, the majority of you who had a first number, we call it a seed number of 20,000, would have written a number close to that, maybe 50,000, maybe 10,000. Those of you who had a seed number of 2 million may have thought, oh, it's nothing like that, but I bet you wouldn't have written anything less than 1 million or more. So you would have been anchored to that first number. So the picture I'm going to show you here says there is this anchor, and what this does is it manifests itself in many ways. What it means is that you only adjust a little bit. Now, this affects risk management, but it affects every aspect of project management when it comes to estimating how long something's going to take or how much it's going to cost. Because as soon as someone says to you, do you think this is going to take 4 weeks? And you might say, well, if it's a bad day, it could take 5. Bad, if it's bad, bad weather, it could take 5. If it's sunny, it could take 3 weeks. What you are unlikely to think about is actually that 4 weeks is nonsense and it could take 20 weeks because you get anchored. And when it comes to risk management, and we're trying to look at, say, 3-point estimates for Monte Carlo simulation, or when we tend to look at probabilities, it tends to anchor us to that first position. This is actually, this methodology, if you like, this anchoring and adjustment is something we all fall foul of. It's something that's there everywhere. And just imagine if you're ever buying a car and you see a sticker price of £10,000 or $15,000 or doesn't matter what it is, and then you do a deal with the person and you get the £15,000 or dollars down to 12,500. You think you've got a good deal. You think you've got 20% off the price or whatever it is, and you're anchored to that first number. That first number was always irrelevant, of course. You might have paid over the odds, but because you were anchored to that first number, you find it very difficult to move away from it. It's subconscious. And perhaps anchoring and adjustments is one of the biggest subconscious biases that we come across. The last one I'm going to talk about on that sort of middle bit about conscious biases and heuristics is something called the confirmation trap. If you translate this slightly, what this can mean, and it really is a problem when it comes to project management and risk management, is that we tend to only seek evidence that aligns to what we want to do. So if we want a project to go ahead, we don't see all the bad things. Take that into the world of risk management. If we want our project to go ahead, subconsciously, we don't identify the things that are going to cause us problems. Now this, I've seen this, I've worked long enough to see this. Sometimes this is done deliberately where people block things out, don't tell anybody, but in most instances, we don't see those things. We can't see them. Now, this is why in some organizations, they have things like peer reviews, or they have independently facilitated risk workshops where they try and bring different people together of different views, and some people may be outside of the project team to overcome this. But this is absolutely fundamental, and it affects everything in life. Many years ago, I did some work with a company that carried out forensics for the police. And one of the things they were told to look for as part of their forensic analysis was try and find things that prove the person didn't commit the crime rather than the proof that the person did commit the crime. And unfortunately, in UK justice over the years, there's been many miscarriages of justice where the evidence that proved contrary to the conviction was never found, was never seen, or in some instances, unfortunately, it was hidden. But sometimes the blatantly obvious was never seen because they only wanted one outcome. They thought the person was guilty, therefore they didn't see the obvious. But on projects, this happens all the time. We need that project to go ahead. We want it to go ahead. If it doesn't go ahead, we haven't got a job. If we identify all those risks, then maybe the project will be cancelled. Perhaps it should be cancelled. So that's the confirmation trap. The last one, if you remember in that diagram, is something called the effect heuristic. These are the things that are hardwired into you. I won't go into, conscious of the time, I'm not going to go into much detail here, but these are the things that you might have heard things like fight or flight. These are these absolute visceral reactions to things. And they're in the table, they're the things on the right-hand side. They're the ones that are things like fear, desire, love, lust, adoration, hate. And some of those, if you've ever really had any of these emotions, then you will know what I'm talking about. And if you're working in a project world and you are identifying risks or looking at risks, and these risks are things that have actually happened to you or petrify you, then you're not necessarily going to respond in the right way. And perhaps this, I said everything, there's a choice here. Some of this stuff is hardwired because it's how we survive, but it really is something we need to think about and calm down. You know, it's easy to say that. Take a deep breath, have a drink, think about this, spin around a few times.
Sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
Thank you, Alexa. Anyway, so these are there as well. I'm not going to go into any more on that one, but again, when you read more on this, you'll find out. Now, there are, everything I've talked about so far is about group individual effects, personal things. And again, hopefully I've drawn some parallels in how they might affect the whole risk management process. There are also a number of group effects. Again, you can read more on these, and some of these overlap. But I don't know whether you've heard of something called groupthink. Some of you must have done. A lot of the research of that came out after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1962. American-sponsored Cuban rebels invaded Cuba. It all went wrong, and apparently afterwards, all of Kennedy's defense staff individually said something like, we knew it was the wrong thing to do and it never worked, but collectively they all said it was a good idea. So that's one of the problems with groupthink. Now there's others on here as well where you can see how groups can change. They can talk themselves into something or out of something, which we call risky or cautious shift. There's also the effect of a leader, and sometimes people call this the Moses factor, after the person from the Bible who actually led people. Now Moses didn't do anything in a bad way, but actually the Moses factor can work can be used against it. But you follow people, you follow what people want to do. And even in some of this, and again, can't culturally stereotype, different cultures react in different ways when it comes to groups and thinking about risk. And just looking at that last thing I just built up, there's a very interesting book written by a guy called Geert Hofstede, and in his book, he talks about the effect of culture on many aspects of the world. Culture's consequences, I think he calls the book. And one of the things he talks about is something called power distance. And the reason why we mention this here is in certain societies and cultures, then if that Moses person is a very senior person, then most people below that will just follow, do as they're told. And if they're told there are no risks on this project, there are no risks on this project. This project is going to go ahead. Or if they're told this risk has 0 probability, which therefore it's not a risk, of course, but a very low probability, then they will just follow the leader because of that deference for power. I do realize there's a lot on here, and maybe I'll give you some more things to read that will help you there. There is one last thing I'm going to talk about here, nearly towards the end, is again, just completing the picture here. Bearing in mind, everything I've said is part of that APM risk syllabus, if you ever want to get to that point. There is a cultural group problem that actually happens where in certain societies, certain cultures, there's a prevalence to avoid uncertainty. And if you ever do look at culture's consequences, the Hofstadter book, he's actually done a world map of how different things manifest themselves in different cultures. And if we take uncertainty avoidance, or you could say the want to avoid risk, he actually pigeonholes certain or draws certain parts of the world where this is more prevalent. And what that means, though, is that people are drawn to a more certain way of doing things. And they don't tend to be entrepreneurial. They tend to want to do things in a routine manner. And if you really do read into some of the stuff that Hofstadter wrote, some of this actually manifests itself in faith and religion, because that is a way that some people can overcome some of this uncertainty that they don't like to live with. I'm not going to say any more about that, but the reason why we talk about it here is when you work with people that or cultures that have a preference for that, trying maybe to suggest, and I've done this, that this project could have an outturn cost between a range or of value, or it could finish any time in this year, so not a precise date. Some cultures won't like to hear that. They want precision, rightly or wrongly. And again, that affects the whole perception of risk. Okay, nearly finished. So Robert, hopefully we'll have some questions. If you do want to read any more about this, there's a couple of Harvard Business Review papers that you can probably find on the internet without paying for, or you can buy from HBR, which are easy to read. Most Harvard Business Review papers are easy to read, but they are, when I first read them, I found them fascinating. A lot of what I've said is explained in these, and it will actually enlighten you, I hope, into understanding how risk management doesn't work or does work, and how some of the, what you might think, crazy decisions have been taken to go ahead with projects that obviously are too risky, but other heuristics and biases came into play and overcame that, if you like, sensible way forward. So recommend you have a look at those. And lastly, just to give myself a bit of a plug, if you do want to find out more about the whole risk management process and within and some of the heuristics and biases, how they affect things, here's a very good book you can buy. David Hillson and I wrote this many years ago. This is the 3rd edition. Have a look at that. And there's my email address. If you want those questionnaires, that questionnaire about your personal risk attitude, drop me an email. I'll send it to you. That's it. And thank you very much for listening. Over to you, Robert.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Firstly, thank you for sharing your knowledge for the last 45 minutes. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to everyone who got involved in the interaction elements. It's great to have you involved in today's event. As mentioned, feel free to post your questions on your control panel and I'll read them out to Peter right now. So I'm going to dive straight into the questions, Peter, and I note that you've got Alexa in the background, so if you struggle with any of the questions, we could always ask Alexa for support.
Yeah, it always comes at the wrong time, doesn't it?
But no, thank you. So Ashok has shared a question and then shared some thoughts. So I'll go with the question first. And it says, do you think the Moses effect was used for COVID injection promotion? Then Ashok has shared, or was it more a group response for COVID vaccinations, UK and Israel, have high take-up of the injections, yet Africa and India do not? Is that cultural? And then Ashok has said that he's very fascinated on why injections were taken up or not from a risk perspective.
Well, this is yeah. I've got to avoid personal preference in this one, so I'm sure the Moses effect actually worked both ways, I think, in that sense. So if I'm sure that some people were led to get it because there was people who were respected, who openly admitted that they were going to become vaccinated, and therefore yes, said if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. But also, I'm sure it worked the other way, where key people said, I don't believe in it, and those people were respected, and so they decided not to do it. I don't know whether the Moses thing would affect what happened in Israel or in the UK. That's just a name. But also, when I chose to have the vaccination, I looked at the risks, and I did a quick risk reward, and I trusted the science and realized, a certain of my age, but the side effects far outweighed the possibility of if I got it, it might well have killed me. I had a heart attack when I was 42, a long time ago, so therefore probably got slightly weak heart. So I looked at it from a statistical point of view. And so, but I can't really talk unbiased. I'm very biased when it comes to this one. And I'm anchored to, so looking at that, I'm anchored to a belief that vaccinations are good for you. We've all had vaccinations. All my children have been vaccinated for everything they could get. And I'm still befuddled by people who won't have this vaccination when they've had every other vaccination that's offered to them. But I'm sure there are many, going back to what Ashok said, I'm sure many of those heuristics and biases came into play. So if you just look at the ones I looked at very quickly. So we had the availability heuristic. 2 people died from blood clots. No, 200 million didn't, but the 2 got more attention because that was memorable and effective. Not 200 million, that was a advantage. A number of people died, many thousands didn't, but the availability sticks in people's mind. Then taking it a different way, stereotyping, it's just another vaccination. I have a flu vaccination every year. I've had all the other vaccinations. Why not have another one? It's just enough. So don't even look past that. Then there's the confirmation trap. If you're for it, you only seek the evidence to support it. If you're against it, you'll seek the other evidence. And our brain will play tricks on that. So all those things come into play. And Ashok, we could have a very long debate on that, but your observations are correct.
Excellent, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Ashok, for your question. I'll move on to John's question. Ashok's already come back to say, I love the analysis. It's a logical thought process, and thank you. So very quick with a response there. A lot of people have asked if today's session's being recorded. Peter has kindly allowed us to record this, and we'll make it available on APM YouTube from tomorrow. We'll send you a link along with the survey, and we welcome your feedback. But diving back into the questions, John, and I'll read this out as it's posted. Don't all these heuristics mean that human beings' assessment of probability in particular are just guesses? And if that is the case, doesn't that mean that the risk assessment is a case of garbage in, garbage out, i.e. Monte Carlo analysis is a bit of a waste of time?
Possibly. So let me just take a deep breath on that. It is some of the things you said there. I think yes, it is guesses. But let's see if we talk about things like probability and impact. So those of you who are familiar with the risk management process know that one of the stages in most people's risk management process is to take your risk and then try to prioritize it or get a sense of its importance by looking at the probability, which is a guess, and its effect on your objectives, another guess. Now, and there are people, and I know I've read books. There's a book somewhere in my shelf here by a guy called Douglas Hubbard called The Complete Failure of Risk Management, or The Failure of Risk Management, who actually would agree with that comment that It's nonsense. Don't even try and do it. It's not worth it. It's garbage in, garbage out. But then you get others, and perhaps I fit into that, that if you've got 100 risks and you don't have the time or the ability to manage all of them, or the money or whatever, then you have to prioritize them in some way. And using a guess of probability, let's call it an educated guess of probability, and an educated guess of impact is a way of dealing with it. And we can overcome some of those biases through facilitation, through better understanding. And I don't think it makes the whole thing a complete nonsense, but I do sympathize with the position being made. And the worst thing is just to say, when you talk about quantitative risk analysis, it's not garbage in, garbage out. You may have heard me say this before, some of you. It's garbage in, gospel out. Garbage in, gospel out, because people believe it. I'll pause there. Hopefully that's helped.
Excellent, thank you, Peter. And John, I hope that helps, and you've got a new phrase to replace the one that you've posted there. Poppy has posted saying not linked to COVID or garbage. Oh, John's instantly come back to say agree. So John's on your side. So Poppy has asked, do you have any tips for how we can tackle the heuristics and biases beyond general awareness training?
I do actually have something I've been working on, which is hints and tips on how to, what to do. And awareness is about being self-aware. So if you know thyself, that's been said for many years, and know what you're thinking. But there are things you can do. So just as I said to you, said earlier, if I've run a risk workshop, and it's a long time since I've had the pleasure to do that, and you ask a collective group of people, what do you think the probability of this is? Then if someone immediately says something without thinking about it, so no reflection, I would always ask, why do you think that? Because they haven't thought about it. It could be one of those heuristics or biases that's coming in. So probe is one thing to find out. Seek evidence and seek confirmation from others. So don't just take a single point of view. Spread the net widely, different people get to, and because some of these, I wouldn't say cancel each other out, but there is another very interesting book up on my bookshelf here called The Wisdom of Crowds. You might have heard about that. And then, so sometimes groups get things right. And so therefore don't rely on single people to make your decisions on, because they may be biased. Just thinking about what was said before, there is a book, again, I keep looking at my bookshelf, but I think it's called, by a guy called Lavallo, I think you might say, and it's called Predictably Irrational. We are irrational people. We can't be rational. It's a delusion to say that we are rational. We are one of the most, we are irrational, but understand that. So Poppy, I don't know if that helped, but you can't overcome them, but you can help to deal with some of these heuristics and biases. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Poppy, we hope that helps with your question. I'm aware of the time, but there's been some great feedback from people. So Matthew said, thank you, Peter, interesting and thought-provoking presentation. Ashok said, I've really enjoyed this talk. Thank you, Peter, for sharing your wealth of knowledge. Rob's just posted, I promise it's not me, fab presentation. I've just brought the book and emailed the questionnaires. Very best, Rob. I'm going to finish on one final question. I'm going to be a cheeky host, if you don't mind, and just take up a couple more minutes of your time. But Robert, again, not myself, has asked, how can we better find the unknown risks?
See, the dilemma there, Robert, is this whole thing. If you might have heard the term unknown, and of course you can't find the unknown, but all we can ever try and do is to minimize those unknowns. And just on that, if you have read Taleb's book or heard the term a black swan, it's absolutely, it's not quite an oxymoron, but you can't identify a black swan risk You can identify a black swan, there's lots of them in Australia, but you can't identify a black swan risk, because once you identify it, it's no longer a black swan. So one of the things I say, and it doesn't answer your question, Robert, is that the aim of risk management is to identify all knowable risks. And what that then means is for you to use as many different mechanisms, approaches, methods, techniques to identify all the things that might happen. And by doing that, just hoping that the ones you've missed are not the ones that will end up as being catastrophic. But that does mean more than just having one risk workshop or asking people's personal opinions. But some people don't want to invest that time, but you can do it. You can make the process better, learn lessons. But there will always be unknown unknowns unless we do have a crystal ball, and we don't. Sorry.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the question, Rob. So looking at the time, I think it's a good time to bring today's event to a close. I would personally, on behalf of the APM, like to extend my thanks to Peter for his time and his knowledge for the past hour. So thank you, Peter.
And thank you for everybody for taking the time to listen to me. And you know where I am, and you know what to look at if you want to find out more. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. And I would also like to echo the thanks for everyone joining us today, getting involved in the interaction elements, posting some really good questions as well. I'd highly recommend going on the APM website, finding the risk SIG, following them so you can get additional information about this, and also look at the APM YouTube where this content will be shared in the coming days. We're also delighted to say that we're bringing back face-to-face events across APM branches, so keep an eye out for one in your local community, and hopefully we can see you in person. But don't fear, we're also still providing virtual events at lunchtime and in the evenings, so please come along to those. As I've shared in the comment function, there's the survey link. We'd be very grateful for your feedback, not only on this event, but also what you'd like to see in the future. So let us know and we'll try our best to make it happen. But on that note, Peter, thank you again. Everyone for joining us, thank you, keep well, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.